Today we're going to look at a section on artificial sweeteners. Now, as we know from our very first lesson, additives are denoted by E numbers, and we have different classes or groups. So artificial sweeteners belong to what are called the E900s. Now, we were asked about artificial sweeteners on a long question back in 2011 on question 2b. The question was actually on diabetes, and incorporated into the question, they asked about the different classes of sweeteners. Now, we were also asked on a short question in 2020 about classifying sweeteners. So they're on two occasions where we have been asked. Now, there are two classes or two groups of sweeteners, and they are bulk sweeteners and intense sweeteners. So we're just going to write a little bit about each of them. So we're taking the heading, classify artificial sweeteners. So we have two groups. We have one, what are called bulk sweeteners, and secondly, we have what are called intense sweeteners. I would say to you to know two examples of bulk sweeteners and two intense. But first of all, we note that bulk sweeteners are used in similar amounts to sugar. And they are a little less sweet than sugar. So a little less sweet. So in other words, if I was using 2 teaspoons of sugar in X, Y, or Z, I would use 2 teaspoons approximately of the bulk sweetener. So it's nearly like for like. So a little less sweet than table sugar. Table sugar, just another word for the white sugar crystals we see at the table. In terms of examples then, we're going to take two. The first one is called sorbitol, and the second one is called xylitol. Now, then we have intense sweeteners. Now, intense sweeteners, you use a lot less than table sugar, much smaller amounts, and a lot more intense in flavour. So just to highlight the two key differences between them. So similar amounts to sugar and a little less sweet than sugar. You use a lot less than table sugar and a lot more intense in flavour. Now, in terms of our two examples of our intense sweeteners, we're going to take, first of all, aspartame, which happens to be the most popular, the most common used sweetener across the planet at the moment. And then we have what are called steviol glycosides, which are available in stores like Holland and Barrett. You can buy a tub of it, as I mentioned to you before, in a powdered form. So back to our chapter there. So bulk sweeteners are first one. We note they are used in similar quantities to sugar and just a little less sweet. And we'll number those as number 1 and number 2. Note we said we have two examples. The first is sorbitol. Now, sorbitol is a sugar alcohol and it is metabolized very slowly. And as a result, it's often used in diabetic foods like diabetic jam, diabetic chocolate, because normal table sugar, as you know, once we take it into the body, we have this sugar spike and our glucose levels are raised very quickly. So with the sorbitol, what we're saying here is that it's not going to cause a sugar spike because it's metabolized much more slowly. So we'll just put down here sugar spikes in blood are avoided. And that's the reason why they're used in diabetic foods. But you may remember that I said to you when we were looking at the dietary guidelines for diabetics, I was saying that any students I've had who've had type 1 diabetes, their nutritionists, dietitians have said, do not eat any diabetic foods for a couple of reasons. The sorbitol actually can have laxative effects. So this can cause you to have bowel movements much more often. But also what's not mentioned here is the fact that outside of the sorbitol, a lot of these diabetic products like the diabetic chocolate, they're quite high in saturated fat, and they're also quite high in kilocalories. And this is something that diabetics absolutely have to avoid, because remember, their circulation, their blood circulation is not the same as somebody who's not a diabetic, and they really do have to take extra special care of the health of their heart. Made from corn syrup and naturally found in prunes and peaches. Now, I would learn one of the two bulk sweeteners in detail. A lot of students go for this one, xylitol. And why is because it's that little bit different, but it's up to yourself. So I'm just going to write down here, learn one. So know the names of two, the sorbitol and the xylitol, and learn one in detail. When I say learn one bulk sweetener. So it's up to you which of the two you're going to study. What I think is very unusual is that it's made from the bark of the birch tree. It has 40% less kilocalories than normal sugar. It's got a low GI, so again does not raise blood sugar levels. We're going to say how blood sugar spikes are avoided. It's a hybrid of a sugar molecule used in mints, sugar-free chewing gum, and sugar-free diabetic foods. So maybe that might be an option for you, that you would learn about the xylitol. So know the names of the two, the sorbitol and the xylitol, and then learn one in detail. So maybe we will just highlight that one here. Now, the second one there are the intense sweeteners. And we said two things. We use them in much less quantities and they have a very intense flavour. So the opposite of the bulk sweetener. In fact, intense sweeteners, you're looking at hundreds of times more sweet than sugar. Now, if I had to learn one of these in detail, I personally would go for the aspartame. So I'm just going to write here, learn one intense sweetener in detail. So up to you. The steviol glycosides are extracted from the leaves of the stevia plant. Now, the stevia plant is a natural plant, but whatever happens during the extraction process, when they're trying to take out the sweetness out of the stevia plant, the FDA, which is an organization in the US that would carry out very, I suppose, strict and safety checks on various food products, drugs, etc. And for a long time, they did not allow steviol glycosides to be sold on the open market to consumers. But back in 2011, they decided whatever adjustments they had made in the production of the steviol glycosides, they said that the stevia glycosides were safe to consume. And once the FDA in the US said it was okay, our, I suppose, equivalent in Europe is the European Food Safety Authority, and they granted authorization of the sweetener. Now, I don't want to be a scaremonger, but that would make me think, if it was not safe at one point and now it is safe, it was a bit controversial. Also, the fact I said in the first lesson, we used stevia glycosides. We got it in Holland and Barrett for a diabetic dessert for a journal assignment a number of years back. And literally, as we opened, I'm still traumatized. I keep repeating myself. But when we opened the container, it was like this very fine dust, and it would just catch you at the back of the throat. It was so fake, really intense fake sweetness. Didn't like it at all. 300 times sweeter than sugar. And even though it's 300 times sweeter than sugar and only the smallest amount was used, there is virtually no spike in glucose levels. It all looks good on paper. I'm just a bit wary the fact that the FDA were not keen on it for such a long time, and then it was only in 2011 they said okay with whatever adjustments they had made. So the one I would learn probably would be aspartame, E951. Now, I don't know if you're aware of this, but in July, I think I said to you June, but July 2023, the World Health Organization classified aspartame as possibly carcinic to humans. And I said this to you in our first lesson. We have two types of food additives, natural and artificial. But within the artificial, we have what are called nature identical and synthetic. And it's this point here, the fact that aspartame is a synthetic additive. Somebody basically made it up. It's a dipeptide made up of 2 amino acids. One of those is called aspartic acid, and the second one is called phenylalanine. And the two of those joined together produces this sweetener, which happens to be 200 times sweeter than sugar. It is the most popular sweetener on the market today. Some babies are born with a condition called PKU, phenylketonuria disease, and that means that they cannot tolerate the essential amino acid phenylalanine. And aspartame is found in Diet Cola, Diet 7-Up, Diet Orange, those chewing gum, what are they called? Extra sugar-free chewing gum. And the next time you see a product that has aspartame, look closely at the list of ingredients. In fact, you might even have that sugar-free extra at home. And as you read it in dark black writing, it's going to stand out from all the other ingredients. It'll say source of phenylalanine. And that's because babies born with PKU cannot have any phenylalanine. In fact, too much can cause brain damage. And how they find out if baby is allergic to phenylalanine, when babies are born, they get what's called the heel prick test, where a little punch is made at the base of the back of the heel, where the skin is a little bit tougher than anywhere else, if you could call any baby skin tough. And a few drops of blood are taken, and they are tested, babies tested for a number of different conditions, but the main one being PKU. So they cannot have, or they cannot tolerate aspartame or anything with aspartame because of the phenylalanine. Others have allergic reaction like inflammation in the lining of the intestine, nausea, diarrhea, abdominal cramping, bloating, etc. Excuse me. Even though there's a lot of controversy around aspartame, we do note it is one of the most tested. But to be honest with you, I wouldn't be a bit surprised in a couple of years' time. In fact, I've been saying this for years, and a student of mine, she must be nearly qualified physiotherapist now, and she sent me a message there in July 23 that had come up on her newsfeed, and she said, home economics will never leave me, because I said one of the days, it could be 3 years, 5 years, 10 years down the line, they're going to come back and say, you know what, we thought aspartame was okay, but not so much. What the moral of the story is here: try and eat food as near its natural state as possible. Certainly avoid synthetic additives. We want food devoid of any kind of preservatives or flavourings, sweeteners, etc. Because if they've been human-made, we really don't know the long-term consequences of them. Right, I would know the 4 functions of the sweeteners here. In fact, that was also asked in 2011 on question 2B and was part C. So know all 4 functions of sweeteners. So first off, we need sweeteners to sweeten food to improve flavour, like corn syrup used in commercially made biscuits, cookies, cakes, etc. Have a look out for corn syrup. To replace sugar in diabetic foods like sorbitol or xylitol in diabetic jam and chocolate. To sweeten food low in kilocalories, we said about aspartame used in Diet Cola, Diet 7-Up and so on. And also as a humectant to prevent food from drying out. Glycerine adds sweetness to food, but it also stops food from drying out. Another place you'd find it other than chewing gum. Do you notice if you buy chewing gum, it could have been made 6 months ago, but it doesn't dry, it's still juicy as you chew it. Fondant icing, sometimes called roll-on icing, comes in all sorts of colours, and when it's rolled out and placed over cakes, etc., you can cut easily through it. The glycerine, which is a humectant, stops the icing from going really hard. So I would know those 4 plus the examples that we've given for each one. Other examples then of natural sweeteners other than normal sugar: honey, which we know, remember, had a relative sweetness of 170, sucrose, maple syrup, the stevia plant. And again, ideally, we should try and choose low sugar or fruits with low sugar, low fructose, like raspberries, blueberries, etc. So just to keep an eye there on artificial sweeteners, it's been 14 years for Leaving Cert next year since we have seen them on a long question. So that is the end of today's lesson.